I understand that you want me to talk a little bit about my farm worker experience.
Your life as a migrant, yes.
My life as a migrant
How old
farm
were
worker.
you when you and your family first came to the United States, and what year was that?
I was born in 1940 in Culiacan, Sinaloa, which is the second state as you go down the Pacific coast. We came here, I was about 2 years old, and my mom had an older sister, Juanita, who lived in Anaheim. Her husband, Agustin, had a barbershop, and so my aunt Juanita invited mom to come up, and so she took my brother, my sister, and me and went up to Anaheim and started looking for work. But she was hampered because I was a handful, to say the least. But my uncle Tomas and my aunt Aurora, who were younger sister of my mom's, were married, and they had no children. So they said, listen, we can take care of little Fernandito, and that way it'll make it easier for you to find work because we'll take care of him. So I went to live with my uncle Tomas and my aunt Aurora. They were migrant farm workers, and we picked crops in the San Joaquin Valley, the Santa Clara Valley primarily, and we harvested grapes. One of my earliest memories of me that I have is me being in a grape box that they used to put the grapes in, and my aunt had put blankets in there, and I was put to sleep underneath the grapevines as they harvested the grapes. I would be asleep underneath the grapevines. I always thought that I was being given a new shirt every time my aunt washed my t-shirts. They came out so nice and clean, I thought they were new. But that was I lived in Rolinda, which is a little suburb of Fresno. I remember living in an army tent, surplus tents after the war. Had a dirt floor, and so my job was to sprinkle water on the dirt to keep the dust down. And at night, when it rained, you could hear the rain hitting the canvas of the tent. To this day, when it starts to rain and I'm in bed, I'll open the door or the window just to see if I can hear those raindrops again. It's one of those memories that you have from childhood.
As you came further north from Southern California, you got into the San Joaquin Valley, did you notice perhaps that you were treated differently, more racism perhaps? A feeling of not being settled as much because you were living that migrant lifestyle?
I don't think I had that awareness. I do remember once kind of slinking down in the pickup when we passed by this little girl's house that I thought was pretty. And I guess I recognized that I was not in the same social level as she was, but I didn't attach any importance to it, and I never thought or felt that I was being discriminated against. I just knew that we were all in the same kind of economic strata, the people that I knew and the people I met. I did grow up as an only child, though, in these labor camps because most of them were farm workers from Mexico, and I'd be working alongside them, and they would say to me, Fernando, stay in school. You don't want to be doing what we're doing when you get to be our age. And I guess some of that stuck to me. My uncle Tomas had 3 years of schooling in Mexico, but he was adamant that I had to go to school. And every time we moved from one camp to the other, and I went to 16 different schools by the time I graduated from San Jose High, he made a point to take me to school personally. So I knew it was important because he didn't normally take that kind of time off. And I would go into the school, and I guess I would tell him I'm here, sign me up. And so all these different schools I went to, one of them was in Rolinda. Rolinda, I started to tell you about, we were picking cotton there. And the farmer had a cow, and when he would milk the cow, I would sit down on a little stool, and there was a dog and a cat, and he would squirt the milk into our open mouths. One of the cartoons that I have by one of my friends who's an artist has that particular scene of the three of us, the dog, the cat, and me, with our mouths open, catching the milk. But that was just, for me, it was living and it's like camping. It was like camping out. We had to dig a huge hole latrine for the outhouse, and I think it had 3 or 4 holes, the seats, so that more people could use it, not just one. But I remember digging that hole and having the shovel, and the shovel would just barely clear the top of the hole, and I'd be down below. It's a small wonder that the dirt didn't cave in and bury me.
What's your earliest recollection of working in the fields? How old were you when you first went out to work in the fields?
Well, we were picking cotton. I think I was 4 years old. My job was to pick the cotton and put it into little bundles ahead of my aunt. My aunt would come up behind me, and she'd be picking the regular row, and I would just be making little bundles, and then she'd get to the bundle, throw that in, and keep on going. So I was about 4 years old.
Can you describe to me, please, what it was, what time you would get up in the morning to go to work, how everybody gathered to, I'm assuming, take the bus ride out to the fields? What was that experience like? What was your typical day like when you were out there working in the fields? Like, what time did you start? What time did you get off?
It was always dark when we got up in the morning, and the radio would be blaring to some Mexican station, blaring some sort of mariachi music or Mexican corridos or something. And my job often was to, because we provided board for the workers, was to crack the eggs and prepare them, ask the workers how you want your eggs. You want it sunny side up, you want it scrambled, you want it raw. And so we always had pot beans and eggs and tortillas in the morning, every morning, and coffee. And that was my breakfast. As a matter of fact, I think I had beans for breakfast, lunch, and dinner as long as I lived with my uncle and my aunt. That was just one of the things. Now my wife has learned how to make beans, and she does a pretty good job of it. So every now and then, for a treat, she'll make me some beans.
Okay, so I get the sense there was a lot of teamwork among family members and other people who lived in the camps. Did that appeal to you, that you could see what you were doing as part of the team and how it helped everybody? And talk about that.
Yeah, I never thought of it as a team effort. I always thought of it as, that was my job. I had to peel potatoes, for example, and boil the beef tongue and to cut it up. And so that was just the chores that you had. I remember washing dishes in these big troughs, and my hands would be cracked and bleeding from the harsh detergents that we used. But that was just my job, to help in running the boarding house for the workers. But working alongside of them, I picked apricots, picked cherries. I remember picking cherries. These trees were about 40 feet tall, 40 feet. They used snake ladders, extension ladders, and then you'd get them up into the tree, and then you lash the ladder to some of the limbs to keep it from sliding. And you'd spend all day going up and down picking cherries. Huge trees, but I specifically remember that. One time, it was my birthday, May 30th, and my uncle never was one to celebrate things. He didn't put much stock in that. But it was my birthday, and I was feeling a little down because here I was working and picking cherries. And I'll be darned if my uncle didn't show up at noon, and he had brought ice cream, and he brought some salami and some sourdough bread and things. He always went to the Italian delicatessens to get food for the lunch meal, and I remember being impressed by that he had taken time to do that, because he never did that otherwise. He was a very stoic individual, and he didn't know anything about banking. He didn't know anything about savings. He didn't know anything about insurance. So when he died suddenly of a cerebral hemorrhage, my Aunt Aurora was left not knowing what to do, because he never let her drive. She never learned to drive. He always paid for everything. She didn't know anything about mortgages, didn't know anything about how to pay the bills. Luckily for her and for me, my oldest sister, Lillian, came to live with us, and she was 6 years older, so she had gone to business college, so she had some smarts, and she was working, and she helped my aunt learn how to run a house. My uncle had bought a little flat top house out in East San Jose. It was a little 2-bedroom house, but it was a house, and we lived in it, and I lived in that when I went to San Jose High School. He died when I was 14, but I graduated from San Jose High in 1957.
You mentioned food earlier. Can you talk up your recollections of the brands of the food, the types of different foods, different types of soda or coffee, anything like that related to the brands that your family would eat, food?
Well, there was always a cold drink or soda box that they had where you put in a dime and you'd get a soda. And so they used Pepsi, and they used Orange Crush, and Dr. Pepper, and 7-Up. Those were the ones, and they would the guys would come in, the delivery guys would bring in the stuff and drop it off to stock up our reserves. My job was to, for example, make sure that we bought potatoes, and we had the sacks of potatoes and sacks of beans and tubs of lard that we used, lots of lard. I don't know that we ever had butter. At one point I remember we had a substitute for butter, margarine, where you had the kind of a white block of what would have been margarine, add a yellow coloring to it, mix it up, and then now it was butter. But that was what we used. And of course they made coffee in these big pots, and guys always had plenty to eat.
Talk about what kids would do in the camp. I mean, obviously you had your family chores to do, but what did the kids in the camps do for fun, for recreation, from what you can recollect?
Well, I wasn't in camps where there were a lot of children. I was usually the only kid around. So I learned to entertain myself. For example, I remember very vividly living in Gilroy and going down to this creek. Well, when you go down below the level of the ground, it's all quiet. And so I would spend time walking around the creek and playing with the turtles and the birds that would come in and the fish. That was something that I always loved, living on ranches, because there was always a creek somewhere nearby that we used. I remember also playing with haystacks, these bales of hay. I would move them around and pretend they were forts, and I'd be spending all this time playing with my imagination on these forts, on these bales of hay. In Gilroy, I remember the farmer had a swing or a rope, and that he would have a grappling hook, and he would grab a bale of hay and swing it to the other side of the barn. Well, it was wintertime, and there was a lot of cow manure that was liquefied, so it was about a foot deep. And I went swinging, thinking I was like a bale of hay, and I lost my grip and I fell into this manure. And I went crying to the woman, the guy's mom. And she said, "No, don't come near me." She turned on the hose, hosed me down.
How did you and your family find work? Did you go to a contractor? Did he say you go down this road and here's where you'll find the orchard to pick the fruit and stuff like that? Can you describe what that process was like and how they treated you, how the contractors treated you?
Well, I have to say that my Uncle Tom, even though he had 3 years of schooling, was a pretty bright guy. He's the guy that wound up talking to the farmer and saying, well, let's see. They would walk along the apricot orchard and say, well, how many tons are here? And I think there'll be so many tons and so much a ton. And then they break it down to how much my uncle would get paid per ton of apricots. And then he would make sure that he got the workers to harvest the crops. And that was part of the process. I do remember when I was in Dos Palos actually, picking cotton, my uncle said, you're in school, you know how to do this. How much should I pay somebody at 3.5 cents a pound if he picks 97 pounds of cotton? Then I would work out I did a kind of a graph. He said, all right, now how much should I pay if he picks 122 pounds at 3.25 cents a pound? So I worked out these graphs for him, and I said, I'll just do it to 100, so that if you have over 100, you do the 100 first, and then the other 22, you come back and do 22, add these two together, and that's how much you pay, because they got paid in cash at these things.
I'm sorry. How old were you at this point when you up till the last time you worked in the fields?
Well, my uncle died when I was 14, and I worked one more year in the fields because that's what I knew to do. But after that, I was now no longer being this migrant worker because my uncle was gone. So I started working here locally. I remember repairing washing machines for this used appliance store and taking bits from one to another, cannibalizing the washing machines to make new ones.
In your experiences working in the fields, I'm sure you're going to agree with what I'm going to say right now. There was always that one guy who claimed he could pick more cotton than anybody else in one shift, or one guy who could pick more apricots. Do you have any recollections of workers that were like that? They claimed to be the super pickers?
Well, I don't have one that says or claimed he was. I know he was. And this guy happened to not be Mexican. I think he was maybe Yugoslavian, or he may have been somewhere in the Middle East. But he worked like a madman. He would race with his buckets of pears, and then he would race back to the ladder and pick as fast as he could, because he was intent on picking as much and making as much money as he could in the period of time that was allotted for the harvest. But most of the time, the guys they worked steadily and they did good clean work. And